Coming up, tough situation for Auburn as Gus Malzahn in the position to have to replace an assistant coach. We'll tell you about it all next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello everyone, I'm Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. Good to have you with us here today for SEC Country Live. We've got a lot to get to, most of it what we planned on talking about, but some days are like this where you begin the show by talking about something that late breaking here in the minutes before we come on the air here, and over the last couple of hours we've all gotten caught up on the fact that Auburn here in a position to have to replace an assistant coach. We'll show you the tweet here from Brett McMurphy from us at one point in time ESPN, a number of places. McMurphy tweeting out that according to his sources that Auburn offensive line coach Herb Hand is headed to Texas as both a co-offensive coordinator and an offensive line coach. The co-offensive coordinator role, usually a good way of giving somebody a raise here, but what McMurphy's reported, I think, has now been confirmed by SEC Country as well. Hand leaving Auburn to head to Austin, Texas. What's your reaction to this?
Well, my reaction, first of all, is that they're already losing a ton of talent. I mean, they're losing a bunch of guys up front when you're talking about Braden Smith, when you're talking about Austin Golson, when you're talking about Casey Dunn. A lot of those guys up front that were valuable pieces for the last couple of years that led a great Auburn rushing attack. Not just a good Auburn rushing attack, a great Auburn rushing attack for the last 2 years under Herb Hand. Now all of a sudden, not only do you have to replace those 4 guys and 5 guys and 6 guys in the 2 deep up front, but now all of a sudden you have to replace their coach too. It's going to be an uphill battle right now for Gus Malzahn. I don't know who he turns to. I don't know who goes into that role as offensive line coach, but they have their work cut out for him, whoever it is.
Benjamin Waltham, SEC Country, is reporting that it sounds like they could have someone in place within the next, couple days here at least. It sounds like Auburn's going to try to strike fast on this because obviously we know in addition to the issues with what's going to happen on the field, there's also the issues with recruiting as well. Auburn doesn't have a lot of offensive linemen signed as it is. Had Herb Hand stayed in place, there was going to be some pursuit of guys in that position here in the final days leading up to National Signing Day, which is obviously in early February. One of the guys, though, in the mix for Auburn is Jalil Irvin, a 4-star offensive lineman from Stevenson High School in Atlanta, Georgia. Irvin tweets out, WDE, we will be fine. That's obviously, I assume, a reference here to Herb Hand's departure. Do you agree with him, Irvin's assessment, that without his position coach in the fold there, that Auburn's going to be fine?
It's like I said, it's an uphill battle, and you mentioned it. They have a lot of recruiting to do in terms of offensive linemen. You're talking about Dylan Wanham from Tucker, Georgia. You're going to see Tank Jenkins out of Montgomery. A lot of those names are going to be mentioned coming up in the coming weeks on down to signing day. But what you do have is a couple of guys on campus that have already been obviously recruited. They've already been signed. They've been through red shirts. Some of these guys in the 2 deep. Calling Calvin Ashley. How many times have we talked about the name Calvin Ashley on the show, and then all of a sudden a name like that becomes a bigger deal moving forward. You have Prince Tegwanobo. You have a guy like Mike Horton, Markel Harrell. But what are you going to get really in the short term? I don't know that Auburn's offensive line has an even chance. Right now, looking at it, I don't know that they have a chance of being as good as they had the last 2 years. Jeremy
Pettis says, let the Gus bus see how it is to lose assistant coaches like Alabama does every year. And it's true, Alabama has weathered that storm. Maybe Auburn hasn't been in that same kind of position. They've had to replace coordinators, but not necessarily for the same reason that Alabama has, replaced assistant coaches, but maybe not quite for the same reason Alabama has. And I agree with you that, I really view offensive line as a strength for Auburn in 2017. Now, it didn't start out being that way. Auburn obviously had its issues against Clemson early in the season, gave up the 11 sacks there that day. By the time November rolls around, they're winning games in Jordan-Hare Stadium against both Georgia and Alabama. It's really the offensive line that leads the way for Auburn in that regard. I really found Herb Hand to be one of the top position coaches in the SEC. I think you and I are both on the same page on this. I'm not going to proclaim that Auburn can't replace Hand, but this is a tough position coach to try to replace, a tough assistant to try to replace. This is one of those positions I don't think Auburn necessarily wants to be in.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the #1 rushing attack in the SEC last year, and I think number 3 or 4 this year once everything was ironed out. Now you got a guy like Kerryon Johnson, Cam Petway headed to the NFL. You got a guy like Braden Smith headed to the NFL. Like I said, Darius James, Austin Golson, the list goes on. Of all of a sudden, you're starting to miss a ton of people from that offensive attack that was very good this year. It wasn't prolific, wasn't world beaters on offense this year, but you had a very good offense. And then all of a sudden, pieces start dropping off. And what you're really left with is going to be Jarrett Stidham and a young group of wide receivers to try to tailor this offense back to a shell of what it was this year. I think that, like I said, they have their work cut out for them. It's going to be interesting to see who they hire and who comes in and who has those recruiting connections to be able to start developing and recruiting some of those guys in the short term.
All right, Bo Molinari criticizing Auburn for being a stepping stone school to a place like Texas right now. I mean, Texas obviously has its problems. I mean, maybe it is a little bit of a surprise that somebody like Han would want to leave Auburn to go to a place like Texas, who's, for me, the future is very much certainly not cemented what the future looks like for the Longhorns. It's in doubt, I think, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's an interesting move, and it makes you wonder about some of the innards, I guess, of that program right now under Gus Malzahn. That, does Herb Hand start to question what his future is at Auburn? Is there a move where maybe he wanted to be an offensive coordinator in the long term or really be the go-to guy? Maybe he didn't see himself getting that position. Whatever the reason is, I just think it's a huge hole. And it's not that Auburn won't be serviceable up front on the offensive line, but that offensive line and that rushing attack for the last 2 years really has been what carried Auburn to the SEC West title this year. It's just not going to be the same. No matter who they start to put in those roles, I don't think you can expect the same things you have for the last couple of years.
I agree with you on that. All right, let's move on to the stuff we had planned on talking about. We always call it our SEC Country Live First and 10. Item number 1 on our list, one of the interesting subjects that kind of popped up over the weekend here, the potential connection between Alabama and Hugh Freeze. Obviously, Brian Daboll makes the decision over the weekend to leave Alabama to go back to the NFL. He's going to be the offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. We'll have more on Daboll in a moment, but let's focus in on possible replacements for Daboll right now, including maybe the former head coach of the Ole Miss Rebels, Hugh Freeze. Let's tell you what we know about that, at least in terms of what's been reported. Let me start here with Aaron Suttles from TideSports.com, the Tuscaloosa News, who wrote that former Ole Miss coach Hugh Freeze was in Tuscaloosa today, was in the football building. Tuscaloosa News has learned Saban has always had a healthy respect for Freeze, who gave Alabama fits with its offense. Freeze was given a head coaching restriction, a 2-game suspension, but only if he were to become a head coach. He would face no restrictions as an assistant coach. That's Aaron Suttles reporting for the Tuscaloosa News. Bruce Feldman, maybe adding some more context to this for SI.com, says, I don't think Freeze's meeting was all about specifically replacing Daboll. Hunch here is that Saban promotes from within for that open role to having Mike Locksley, who joined the Crimson Tide in 2016, but it's possible that Saban is using the meeting as an opportunity to pick Freeze's brain. He could also still bring the former Rebels coach in onto Alabama's staff. I'm assuming that Feldman may mean it as an analyst role there. I don't think he means as like tight ends coach or something like that, although who knows at this point in time. As a Alabama alumnus, how do you feel? How do you think Bama fans should feel about potentially hiring Hugh Freeze in any capacity?
Well, I don't think this is shocking. And you and I talked about this last week when this first popped up under Ian Rappaport reported this on Twitter and brought it to everybody's attention that maybe Brian Daboll's leaving. We kind of joked about the possibility this might be a landing spot for Hugh Freeze because Nick Saban has rehabbed guys. He's worked with guys that have had problems in their past. I'm not the type of guy that's going to sit here and judge everything about Hugh Freeze. He made some terrible decisions. He affected a ton of people at Ole Miss. But I think more than anything, he affected himself and he affected his family. And so I think moving forward, you look at it professionally in terms of being an alumnus. I think that Hugh Freeze, I don't think he'll be given the OC role. I think that when you look at it, Nick Saban might be just trying to pick his brain. The names that have come out for me, Hugh Freeze, Jim McElwain's been mentioned as being contacted. Obviously, you've heard about Michael Locksley and Chip Long from Notre Dame. I think Nick Saban's trying to get at least 2 of these guys in the building. I think that I don't know if you know quarterbacks coach. I don't know if you look at, obviously, offensive analyst. You look at some of these different roles. How can you mold them to where they could all work? I mean, you've seen it, the Chris Winkie, Dan Werner type roles that you've seen in the past. I think that Nick Saban wants to give this job to Michael Locksley. I don't think he knows for sure if Michael Locksley's ready.
Mark Paris says it should not happen for Hugh Freeze. And the more I kind of think about it myself, the more I kind of agree with Mark here that while there is no denying, I think Hugh Freeze is a sensational play caller. Just a terrific offensive mind. In terms of Saban using his clout and his leverage for this just seems like a poor way to use that. I mean, as an examples of kind of, why I might feel that way, let me go back to early January when Hugh Freeze made an appearance on Clay Travis's radio show on Fox Sports Radio. It was kind of a long-ranging interviews where a lot of stuff came up, including at least one of the rare instances that I know of when Freeze has talked on the record about the infidelity, the relationships with call girls that I guess led to the problems with his wife and ultimately the embarrassment for Ole Miss. Here is some of Hugh Freeze with Clay Travis talking about that.
It's the biggest regret of my life is that I crossed a boundary that did not honor my wife totally, or my family, or my friends, or who I am. I mean, I worked really hard for a large portion of my life to build a name that's based on certain things, and while I fully know and even know better now that in any marriage, I mean, if Jill and I have been able to talk to a lot of marriages, there's people, you go through problems, and we're certainly no exception, but I caused this one.
Yeah, he says he caused that one, and that's not the only baggage that Freeze would wear with him coming to the Alabama job or any job that he would take next. It's also the long NCAA investigation that turned up some pretty tough stuff for Ole Miss, even if all of it didn't quite touch Hugh Freeze directly. Here is Freeze with Clay Travis from back in early January talking about those NCAA issues.
They, for 5 years, have investigated our program thoroughly, and the findings that they found against me personally were just that I did not monitor booster activity, in particularly with 2 staff members, and that's the only finding they found against me. There was no individual charge of anything that I did that was impermissible or wrong, but something I didn't do, and that's that I did not monitor closely enough some of the booster activity in regards to our staff. The penalty is a 2-game suspension if I'm a head coach somewhere and for 2 conference games. Now, there is no penalty if I'm not a head coach.
So here's my thought on this, Mike, and you know Saban very well. This is a guy that likes to keep everything kind of close to the vest, likes to keep his, whatever cliche you want to use. This is a guy that values privacy in terms of football decision-making. The fact that the entire world knew that Hugh Freeze was in Tuscaloosa is not typically in keeping with the way that Nick Saban handles these issues, which means that they wanted this to become public. I believe they wanted it as a test balloon to see how people would react to this. I think the reaction here is going to be one of, really, Nick Saban, you've got the power to do anything you want to do, and you want to use that good name to sort of rehabilitate a guy like Hugh Freeze, who's invested in 2 pretty nasty issues, a pretty serious NCAA deal, and an embarrassing issue with call girls. This just seems beneath Nick Saban. Yes, you rehabilitated Steve Sarkisian. Yes, you're rehabilitated to a certain extent Lane Kiffin. But this just seems a rung on the ladder even below that and beneath the program like Alabama, at least in my mind.
Yeah, I think the comfortability I have, at least when I look at the opportunity that might lie in front of Hugh Freeze, is that once the notion came out that he might not be just an offensive coordinator position type of thing, I think that's what led to a little bit more comfortability with me. I think if he comes in there and all of a sudden he's named the offensive coordinator and is in charge of everything, I think I start to second guess a little more. If it's an analyst role, the way Steve Sarkisian was, if it's some kind of other coaching role, I begin to feel a little bit better about it. And I think that's a personal thing for me. And you've heard me talk about Hugh Freeze a ton in the last year on the show. I just think that he's a guy that's worth giving another chance to. And I don't just say that just because Alabama. You've heard me on the show before say similar things. I don't want him as offensive coordinator per se, but if you're going to put him in a role where he's making, $25,000 a year, has a cap on his salary, and just wants to get back into coaching, then I don't see anything wrong with it. I think that Nick Saban, you're right. In a lot of ways, I look at Nick Saban and say, why would you even want those problems? There's so many other names out there. There's so many other offensive guru types you could bring in to be in a role like that. Why would you want those problems? But he has the track record of doing it. And so I think if you find some kind of combination, I got to be honest with you, the combination of Hugh Freeze in the background and maybe Jim McElwain as offensive coordinator, those 2 meshing their offensive philosophies together, I think that gets a lot of Alabama fans excited.
And I'll say the same thing about Jim McElwain, because Greg Steele mentioned that in the comment section. Hey, that's who Alabama should hire. They should hire Jim McElwain. But you and I, we went round and round this death threat thing back at Florida, and people think I'm joking about that, but there was no proof those death threats happened. Does that make him tough to hire here? I mean, given the fact that, he was owed a bunch of money that he forfeited, that he let go of. Their only reason to interpret that he did that is he couldn't substantiate the claims that he made. Is that okay for an offensive coordinator to have that in his background?
Well, I think Nick Saban knows Jim McElwain as well as anybody. I think that Nick Saban's obviously worked with him a ton. He knows his family, he knows his background, and I think that they've probably talked about it before. So in my mind, I would think that Jim McElwain has talked to Nick Saban about the situation before. And you're right. We've gone round and round on that. I've always sided with Jim McElwain. I don't know why he'd lie about death threats, but here we lie where we still haven't seen any evidence, to support his claims. So maybe it is a double rehab job. Maybe there is something where Jim McElwain comes in. I don't think Jim McElwain even comes close to being the risk that Hugh Freeze is, though. Jim McElwain has a little bit of a hiccup with obviously the administration at Florida, but Nick Saban knows Jim McElwain as well as anybody.
Let me make a final point on this, and it's really more of a question for you. the Tagovailoa family situation, I think makes this pretty interesting. My understanding is that Tua's pretty outwardly religious, that, who you hire to work with him as an offensive coordinator, I think that's going to matter to that family. And we certainly know, even Chris Kirshner's piece kind of pointed out how strong the family bond and how that sort of, driven, Tagovailoa's success. There's also another Tagovailoa coming down the pipe after Tua here. So who you hire at offensive coordinator, I think, determines the comfort that they feel there in Tuscaloosa. Jim McElwain, who had no great success recruiting or developing a quarterback in Gainesville, is that a turnoff for the Tagovailoa family? And, someone with Hugh Freeze's sort of checkered past, would that also be a bit of a turnoff? I think that family, I'm not telling you let the family pick the offensive coordinator, but you'd be a fool if you didn't at least consider their wishes in making a hire like that.
I agree. It's definitely an avenue to look down. I think you explore that if you're the Tagovailoa family. I think that here's the thing, and obviously we don't talk about religion or politics on the show, but I think that knowing some of the people that know Tua, obviously they're about forgiveness, and that's something Hugh Freeze has brought up in the past as well. So I don't know. I don't know the dynamics as far as recruiting a kid that's a 2020 prospect in Talia Tagovailoa. I think that this is a short-term answer at best if you're Nick Saban. If Hugh Freeze comes as an analyst role, I think it lasts 1 year anyways.
That's item number 2 now on our SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list. So you don't have to look very far to kind of figure out who I root for. I'm a Georgia fan. I got to tell you, I think I reflect the mood, Mike, of a lot of Georgia fans about Roquan Smith. The Buckus Award-winning linebacker makes the decision yesterday to move on to the NFL draft. This is the only choice he could have made. He's going to be a top 15 pick in all likelihood. You can't come back to college if you're going to be a top 15 pick, because you can't move up the draft enough to make the risk, worth the reward you might get. It would almost been like negative recruiting against Georgia had Smith come back, almost like they gave him faulty information or bad advice. He had to go to the NFL. Man, oh man, how do you replace this guy? I think that's a really tough. I think it's a tough question.
Well, yeah, and you look at a guy like Spencer Lanning. Is that his name? Lanning? Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
The new coach for Georgia, obviously at the linebacker position. You look at what else they're missing around him. I mean, they're missing a ton of talent that's going to be headed off to the NFL. A lot of seniors on both sides of the football. So there is a lot of a rebuilding job. The fact is this, though, and I've seen this happen at Alabama at the linebacker position for a few years now. You can't replace him. You can't. You just got to get that off your mind if you're a Georgia fan. You don't replace a guy like Roquan Smith. You hope that everybody else in those positions around him, being the rush ends, being the defensive line, you have to have people step up in other areas. Cornerbacks, you're going to hear a lot about DeAndre Baker. You're going to hear a lot about some of the guys in the interior. Everybody else has to step their game up in order to replace a guy like Roquan Smith.
Let me show you what Roquan said himself, a statement released by the University of Georgia about his departure. He says, as you know, this is somewhat of a crossroads for me. I've had discussions with coaches and family and a lot of thought and prayer. The decision to leave is not easy, but I know it's the right one. Georgia's always going to be my school, my home. I sincerely wish all the best to the coaching staff, players. They continue to reach higher goals in the years to come. So he says it's not an easy decision, and our understanding is, based on some reporting by our colleague Seth Emerson over at DogNation.com, it really wasn't an easy decision. That Roquan, despite the fact he's got millions of dollars waiting for him, maybe he was hungry to come back to Georgia for another year. I don't know if that's how much of a consolation prize that is for Dog fans, but my understanding is that that's not lip service there from Roquan. He really did at least pay some consideration to, can I not just come back and do all this one more time and then go to the NFL? It'll still be waiting for me. So apparently he did at least consider it.
I think if he had been slotted anything lower than what he's supposed to be slotted, top 15 pick, if he had been maybe even back in the first round, I get the feeling like he might have returned. I mean, I really do.
Yeah.
You've seen guys in the past. A guy like Andrew Luck kind of fits that mold of people that just loved being in college, wanted to be around college, wanted to get their degree, people that love to live in that life. And obviously Roquan feels like, chip on my shoulder, I think we can get back to the playoffs next year and kind of build this defense. But too much money being left on the table. And honestly, I kind of compare his situation to a guy like Damian Harris, where Damian Harris comes back to Alabama, could have been drafted, but he's not nearly as high as Roquan Smith, so I think it's the easy decision.
I think, the comparison to Andrew Luck, too, quarterbacks can be number one overall. They can also sort of hand-pick their teams, at least to a certain extent. We've seen that in the past. Linebackers don't really have that power, that opportunity. Smith's slot right here is about as high as he's going to go. But in terms of what Georgia's missing, I thought after the Georgia Tech game, Kirby Smart's description of Roquan was just about perfect. And for Dog fans, they lived through this for 2017, and they lament having to replace all this in 2018. Here's Kirby bragging on Roquan.
Machine. I mean, he is a tackling machine. What he did today, and I can't say because I haven't watched the tape, but what I feel like was what I saw all week in practice. I mean, the guy's sideline to sideline, relentless, athletic, tough, competitive, leads, talks when people need talking to, quiet when it needs to be quiet. I mean, he's has impeccable character, and just proud of the way he works and buys into what we believe.
So tackling machine, I think, is a great description there from Kirby Smart about Roquan Smith. I overall agree with you, though. I mean, Georgia's got some pretty talented interior linebackers. None are going to step up and play in 2018 like Roquan Smith did in 2017. But that doesn't mean the replacement for him can't come from a cornerback position. DeAndre Baker becoming a big-time playmaker. Tyler Clark as a defensive lineman becoming a big-time playmaker. Jonathan Ledbetter maybe as well. You know, Georgia just needs to find a great player somewhere. It doesn't have to be an inside linebacker next year.
No, I agree. And that's how it happens. You know, there's a reason that seniors graduate and there's underclassmen that take over. And it's hard to have a guy just step right into that role. And listen, you know, on the field, Roquan Smith and Reuben Foster to me for the last couple of years. You know, you go through all that stuff. You lose the national title game. You know, you get drafted in the first round and become a great player in the NFL. I think on the field they are very comparable. And what you have is just a situation where nobody's able to replace them. You lean on more on guys in different situations. You mentioned Tyler Clark. I thought he was incredible this year. I thought watching him on tape, really a game changer. Where at the beginning of the year everybody's talking about Trenton Thompson, and by the end of the year you're talking about Tyler Clark. And it really, I think it molded that way. So I would not be shocked to see Georgia and at least the look of their defense start to transition in that direction.
By the way, Esteban Esteves, an LSU fan in our comment section, says Devin White's still better. So LSU fans have kind of weighed in. They've been heard from on this subject today, and Devin White certainly had an outstanding year. Let me move on to item number 3 here in SEC Country Live, and what I think is quickly becoming one of the stories here in early 2018 in the SEC. Let me start with something happened in the basketball game over the weekend where one of the elite recruits for Tennessee for its 2017 class, a guy who had a big season on the field for the Vols, Trey Smith, really a consensus freshman All-American for 2017. He was honored at the basketball game here. Listen to the ovation Smith gets from Vols fans. So we'll see Trey Smith on that in just a minute. But the problem for Trey Smith, though, here is that, or at least the problem for Tennessee is, while Smith has been a great player and living up to all the hype that he had coming out of his high school campaign when he was a 5-star prospect, there really haven't been quite enough of those guys for Tennessee as of late. But with Jeremy Pruitt, you get the sense things are going to change on that.
Yeah, I do. And listen, Trey Smith is one of those guys you build around. I mean, for me, this was Andre Smith when I was in college. That when Nick Saban took over, there was already a cornerstone left tackle that could win an Outland Trophy, that could be part of really the improvement project. And I think that's what Jeremy Pruitt's looking for in a guy like Trey Smith.
Yeah. So Trey Smith was that guy. But what Barton Simmons from 24/7 Sports tells us is there may be a lot more of those kind of guys for Tennessee in the future. And as I said before, I thought this was one of the real early developing storylines for 2018 in the SEC. Barton Simmons was on WJOX, was a sports station in Birmingham, Alabama, talking to some guys in the state of Alabama. He says, you guys have seen it up close because Pruitt's been at Alabama, how effective Pruitt is as a recruiter. Tennessee's a school that it's really hot right now. I'd be a little unsettled if any of my school's prospects were heading to Knoxville right now because you have a new staff, a lot of energy, a lot of optimism. I would keep an eye on that. That's Barton Simmons really bragging on Jeremy Pruitt. And for me, those are not empty words. I think we're already seeing proof of that. J.J. Peterson, after being an Alabama lean for a long time, up and commits to Tennessee really close after Jeremy Pruitt's hired. Quay Walker, the outside linebacker, also an Alabama commit. He visits Tennessee this weekend, eliminates Florida on the heels of that visit. Yeah. What Barton Simmons says about Jeremy Pruitt right there, I believe is true. He's having a major impact on the recruiting trail. There's a lot of work to be done to get Tennessee to be a competing program. Don't expect contention in the SEC East for at least the next 2 years, I don't think. But the recruiting stuff is always the precursor to on-field success. What Pruitt's doing at Tennessee, I think, is a real story.
No, I agree. And you didn't even mention a guy like Jacob Copeland.
Yeah.
Some of the other people we're seeing, who's the cornerback, Elijah, something from California that's going to be flying in this next weekend. It's a big deal. And I think what's interesting, too, is to me, what Jeremy Pruitt does this year is just going to be icing on the cake. I feel like Jeremy Pruitt really is trying to establish the groundwork for the next couple of years. You've seen him go into programs in Atlanta, in Birmingham, in Mobile, the Hoovers of the world, Hewitt Trustvilles, UMS Wrights. He's gone into all these programs and almost like, it's almost like he's handing out scholarships to groups at a time. It's like, hey, you guys get together, you 5 people on this team, or you 4 on this team, or you 3 on this team, offering them as sophomores and saying, you know what, make sure you guys come to Knoxville next year. Make sure you guys are a part of this program moving forward. We want all of you guys on board. And it's almost like he's taking a shot to saying, listen, if we can win, if we can land 2 or 3 of you guys, maybe we can get the whole group and we can get an incredible cast of players up here in Knoxville. I love the way he's gone about it. And we mentioned it, that Jeremy Pruitt was going to make his own blueprint. This is not like Nick Saban. This is not like Kirby Smart. He's going to go about things and do it in his own way. Now, It's like I said, I don't think this year's recruiting class really is going to make or break Jeremy Pruitt. I think it's all about building towards the future. To me, the cupboard's still empty. It's going to take a couple of years to build back towards that, but I love the way he's gone about it so far.
Trey Duke says Pruitt doing it, and I agree with that. I also agree with you too. He says he thinks that UT is going to be competing here soon. I think the thing you got to do is you got to win just enough to sort of buy yourself some grace in future years. You know, because what can happen is if you don't win games early on, I mean some games with the players that you inherited, all of a sudden you can't go out and sell results to recruits.
Yeah.
The pathway is always the same. You start off selling early playing time. This is how bad we need you. Look how bad we are. This is how bad we need you. But then when you get a few recruits, you got to have results with those recruits so you can then sell results. You can't sell early playing time forever. At a certain point in time, you got to be able to sell results. So that's what Pruitt has in front of him. But I'll tell you another sort of ricochet storyline off what's happening here with Jeremy Pruitt. I think it's a potential problem for Florida. You know, the Quay Walker is an example of that. The fact that Walker eliminates Florida on the heels of this Tennessee visit, that's a tangible example of that. But just look at the atmosphere. Just sort of, put your ear to the ground. I feel like you're hearing a lot more about Tennessee right now than you do Florida. And Dan Mullen's an established coach. Dan Mullen ought to be able to build some of that kind of stuff up. With all due respect to what happened for him in December, I feel like there's a little bit more buzz right now around the Tennessee program. Yep. And listen, you can't really bottle up buzz. You can't really sort of define what that means. But for me, there's more buzz about Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee than there is about Dan Mullen at Florida.
I agree. And from the outside looking in, to me, I wonder if that's not because Mullen's got a lot of recruits in his backyard and Jeremy Pruitt's having to go throughout the Southeast to really find some of these guys. But I have to agree with it. And I think it's interesting. Look, I don't think it's just a problem for Florida. I think it's a problem for every school in the SEC. I think that when Tennessee is good and when they're great, they can recruit nationally. They can go out to Louisiana and find a guy, and Alabama and find a guy, and start to get all these guys on board in Knoxville. You're right though, and I have to agree with you on your point about how this thing has to come in steps. And Tennessee at some point has to be good on the field. How many times did we talk before the year of Kirby Smart starting to get these guys interested in Georgia, trying to put the fence up around Georgia? Well, all of a sudden you started to see the product on the field. Kirby Smart was not telling lies to these recruits anymore. He was being honest when he said they were building towards a national championship contender team, and they believed him. And for that reason, they signed on the dotted line in December.
Billy Lewis says, I hope UT makes it back to the promised land. Greg Steele says, who is a Florida fan, by the way, but Greg says, how about for a start, Tennessee beats Vanderbilt here in 2018? Listen, I totally get those are the shots you can take at Tennessee right now. Tennessee was obviously bad. That's the point of changing over from Butch Jones to Jeremy Pruitt. You made the Georgia comparison. Georgia's first year under Kirby Smart, the 2016 season, that was essentially only a victory over a top 10 ranked Auburn. And that was the one win that Georgia had that it could sell during that offseason. Can Tennessee get just one signature win? Yep. Can it beat a team that either beat it a year ago or has some cachet? Seems like it means something. You give Jeremy Pruitt one win, give him one decent win, all of a sudden at that point in time, that 2019 class develops even more momentum at that point.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what's funny about it too is we can sit here and say, well, the cupboard's empty. Here's what's funny about Jeremy Pruitt on the Tennessee job. It's not that much is expected of him in year one. Tennessee was so bad last year that it's like, hey, a couple of big wins, Tennessee fans will be happy in year one. And you can start to turn that corner and you can buy a longer leash and you can do a lot more things in the recruiting trail. I think that, when we talk about national brands and we talk about Tennessee, everybody looks and wonders, is Tennessee going to make it back to the top? There's not a lot of you're not expecting a ton in year one under Jeremy Pruitt. I think that's what's crazy about this entire situation. It's not like you're saying, well, he's got to win at least 8 or 9 games. It's just simply not true. He has to win the games he's supposed to win this year.
David Terry says Vols on their way back up. Terry Went says don't overlook a hungry Vol. Slightly different opinion coming from Davidson Sill in the comment section, who has some not really complimentary things to say about Jeremy Pruitt. And I will say that while you obviously see what Pruitt's doing on the recruiting trail and you're impressed by that, the demeanor with which he handles himself as a head coach, his ability to sort of organize the staff and just sort of look presidential standing on the sideline, that is going to be crucial here because that is the danger when you sort of pluck a guy that's never been a head coach before. On the one hand, you get a big-time dose of energy, but if he can't handle the spotlight that becomes being a head coach, then all of it's really for naught. That's at least a fair point to bring up.
I mean, listen, I love Jeremy Pruitt. I consider Jeremy a friend. I could call Jeremy Pruitt tomorrow and ask him a question. He'd answer the phone probably. But that's the biggest question for me. Yeah. That's the biggest question for me. I'd tell it right to him face if I was sitting here talking to him, where he's never been a head coach. This is not like, he's been a head coach here, been a head coach there, been an interim head coach. Never been a head coach.
And that's not unique to Jeremy Pruitt. It's true for anyone who hasn't been a head coach.
It really, it's you ask the question, what will the demeanor be? Can a guy that's never been a head coach lead a program that really is a national brand, that's a top 20 team nationally, historically, in Tennessee? I think that's a fair question for Tennessee fans to ask. I think it is nice, and we talk about this a ton. I think it is nice, though, that he has Philip Fulmer in his back pocket.
Can we change the subject just for 2 seconds?
Sure.
I promise we'll get back to our 1st and 10 because we got a lot of stuff we still got to do. Jimmy Brout in the comment section says Jimbo Fisher, the new coach at Texas A&M, will never beat Nick Saban in Alabama. You agree or disagree with that? Over under 0.5 wins against Saban for Jimbo Fisher. That's a good topic.
Well, here's the thing. I think Jimbo Fisher will be at A&M long after Nick Saban's gone. If that makes any sense. I don't know. Head to head, you look at the next 2 years, maybe 3 years down the road. I'm not sure. I think that's a tough ask of anybody. I mean, it's a tough ask of anybody, and then you're going to point to one program and ask if he'll be able to do it. He's going to have the opportunity. I don't know that it gets done within the next 3 years. And after that, you start wondering which coach will be where.
That's a really good topic, really good comment in the comment section. That's what we love. This time of year, a lot of y'all just sort of comment on stuff that y'all want to talk about, which Mike and I find hilarious.
Yeah.
Some of it we don't get a chance to actually speak to on the air. Some of it I'm just reading while Mike's talking, and other times we'll just sort of change up what we're doing to kind of reflect what y'all are talking about. That's why I love SEC Country Live. And the comment section is one of the things that make it fun for me. For now, though, let me get back to the regularly scheduled subject matter, item number 4 on our SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list. And Steve Ensminger is the new offensive coordinator at LSU. We've kind of gone round and round about what we think Ensminger is going to be. LSU fans have kind of weighed in. We've kind of weighed in, and we'll have to wait and see on that. One of the things that I did think was interesting, though, was Ensminger, during his introductory press conference, was asked about the chances that LSU, in its second year under Ed Orgeron, would be able to sort of replicate the year 2 success that Kirby Smart enjoyed at Georgia. Here's what Ensminger said in terms of the likelihood that happened. He said Georgia had a unique ability with great running backs. They had a chance to develop Jake Fromm. Early in the year, they didn't rely on him to make plays. They had a chance to develop him. He went through a whole season and got better and better. Confidence grew with everything else. I think we can do that. The only difference right now is, with us, hey, do we have a good running back? It's just like every other position, none of them are proven yet. So here's what would concern me about that quote if I was an LSU fan.
Yeah.
The situation with Georgia was not running back related. We knew that Chubb and Michelle were good, but Chubb and Michelle had been good on average teams. Obviously, LSU's got to try to figure out who its running backs are, but in terms of replicating some sort of dramatic year 2 improvement, the way that Kirby Smart did at Georgia, that's all on the quarterback. And Ensminger either doesn't know that, which I don't believe, or doesn't want to talk about that, which makes me nervous.
Yeah.
If the situation is so dire for LSU at quarterback that Ensminger can't even bring it up in a discussion about how do you really take a big leap forward in 2018 when it's obviously quarterback related for LSU, that makes me a little nervous right there.
Definitely makes me nervous too. But I will say this: the press conference for Ensminger pulled me back in a little bit, made me just a little bit, just maybe 5%, maybe a little bit more of a believer in Steve Ensminger as an OC. This wasn't a guy that came out and said, "Oh, we're gonna bow up and we're gonna run it into whatever box and we're gonna play smash mouth brand of football and LSU. We've got great running backs and great offensive line." He came out and said, "Listen, we're still going to run the ball, but we've got a really deep wide receiver core. It's probably the deepest position on the team right now. We're going to run 3 or 4 wide outs, and we're going to run the football." And I think that's especially important this year under LSU. When you look at the fact that Will Clapp just declared, Toby Weathersby's gone, you're trying to fill the hole of quarterback. Darius Geis has declared for the NFL. There's a lot of unknowns about the running game. So I think you have to open things up, get a lot of guys out wide. I think it's going to look very much like a 2015 Lane Kiffin version of Alabama's offense, where Derrick Henry wins the Heisman, but they still have a spread principles in there. It's very much like Arkansas has been running the last couple of years. I bought in a little bit to Ensminger saying that. I was worried that we were going to go back to that Les Miles style of football as the offensive coordinator, and Ed Orgeron, all the promises he made under Matt Canada, was going to have to take them back under Steve Ensminger. Doesn't seem to be the case. I can't wait to see it start to play out on the field.
Shannon Burgess says it's been quarterback-related at LSU for years now. There's no way he, meaning Ensminger, isn't aware. Why show all your cards? Shannon, I guess, and you're an LSU fan, I'm not, so you can speak to this better than I can, but I guess what I want to hear from Ensminger in that quote, maybe he said more of this during the press conference. I'll admit I didn't see every single one of his quotes, but what I want to hear is some ownership of what Shannon just talked about there, which is how long are we going to go without having a quarterback? Because here's the thing. If you want to make the Georgia comparison, which Ensminger was asked about in LSU, the fact is, there were people in Athens this time a year ago who already thought Jake Fromm was better than Jacob Eason. It's just a fact. I mean, people thought that Fromm was a pretty special quarterback. I don't hear people saying the same thing about Miles Brennan. I don't hear people saying the same thing about Lowell Narcisse, which doesn't mean they can't be very good quarterbacks. But Georgia had a situation where it had an incumbent starter and a backup as a freshman who may have been better than the starter, as it turns out probably was. In the case of Narcisse and Brennan, I don't know that you're working with those kinds of prospects.
Yeah, I wonder the same question. And obviously Miles Brennan getting limited snaps this year. Laurel Narcisse, who knows what you got in there? Do they try to find some kind of graduate transfer quarterback the way they have in the past, the way Zach Mettenberger comes in as a transfer out of a JUCO? Do they try to go that route, the way that Gus Malzahn's been successful doing those types of things? I don't know. All I know is that the quarterback position for too long at LSU has been a question mark. And it's up to Steve Ensminger and Ed Orgeron to get that fixed. Is this going to be the year? Who knows? Who knows what we're going to get on the other end? Steve Ensminger hasn't been in this role. Ed Orgeron hasn't really been in this role where he has to figure out Steve Ensminger. There's too many unknowns right now for me to say LSU's offense is going to be good. They have to solve that offensive line. They have to solve the running game. They have to find somebody to get the ball to their playmakers out at wide receiver.
All right, item number 5 on our SEC Country Line 1st and 10 list. We started the show by talking a bit about Auburn. The Auburn basketball team ran into some trouble from some Mississippi State students over the weekend. Of course, the Auburn basketball team's got nothing to do with this. But Mississippi State doing a little taunting of Auburn with one of its players at the free throw line when the team traveled to Starkville on Saturday. Take a listen to the chant and the cheer that shows up here with some Mississippi State students kind of reminding Auburn of not getting it done back at the end of the football season. Here is a quick little video.
And 6 in a row. It's domination.
That is domination, but this version of the Auburn Tigers, I think, is a different animal. They are among the SEC's elite. Trying to keep it going, trying to keep that 0.
Did I see Stingray in there?
Yeah, I don't know if you did. So while the two analysts have the most boring basketball conversation I've ever heard, and the Auburn guy shoots the free throw, you see the Mississippi State fans chanting UCF, UCF, UCF. Obviously a reference to Auburn's Peach Bowl loss to Central Florida, which sort of started the whole national championship conversation with the Golden Knights and kind of everything else. How embarrassed do you think Auburn should be having lost to UCF?
I give it like a 5 on a scale from 1 to 10. Listen, who's going to talk crap to them? The Mississippi State, they housed Mississippi State by 30. Mississippi State, by the way, lost the basketball game too.
Yeah.
They're up by 7.
By the way, did you see our boy Brandon Walker? I shouldn't bring this up if I don't have visual evidence to prove it. He got taken out by Cold Takes Exposed this week because he was celebrating the Mississippi State victory a little too early. Maybe we'll show that tomorrow. Our buddy Brandon Walker got called out.
Yeah, that's funny. But I mean, they should. Right there, you can see Mississippi State's up by 7. They're starting to feel themselves. It's the first half still. Auburn comes back. Auburn's basketball team has been very good. So it's like, Auburn, there might be a little bit of being embarrassed in there, but to who? They beat Georgia this year as the number 1 team in the country. They beat Alabama in the Iron Bowl. They beat the brakes off of Mississippi State. LSU, I guess, if any team, should be the one chanting UCF in terms of football stuff, but they didn't really handle Auburn by any means either.
I like what Bo Molinari's in the comment section. How confused are those basketball fans right there? Or the basketball players, I mean, but by what goes on. That's so true. It's like, the SEC basketball games are sort of like de facto opportunities to settle scores from football. Yeah. For Georgia, I can tell you the only thing anybody does is look to see which recruits may show up at the games. It's like half of these basketball games are just sort of backdrops for a football conversation.
It does remind me of when we talked about this, what is this, 2 months ago, the Fire John Curry chant at the Tennessee basketball game. I was like, I'm not a fan. Like, these basketball players are like, what's going on? We just want to show up and play.
Can anybody care what we're doing?
Why do you want our AD fired? We're just trying to win a basketball game.
So, but on the Auburn thing, I guess my final point on this is that Auburn, if it wins that game, actually can make a case that it goes in the offseason with a pretty good level of momentum. It beat the reigning SEC champion, beat the reigning national champion. It's got a lot going for it. And I think a lot of that potential bragging rights is sort of muted by the fact that you can't go out and beat UCF, especially since UCF essentially called its shot against you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the part that makes it look so bad is you got this bunch strutting around like they invented football, and Auburn essentially just sort of laid there and took it.
Yeah, I think that's the toughest part for me, too. And listen, if you think Auburn fans don't have the bragging rights in the state of Alabama right now, and Alabama's the national champion, and Auburn's like, hey, look, we beat you. We beat you in the Iron Bowl. We beat you when it counted. You hear a lot of that, and you're going to continue to hear a lot of that year-round. I think that the biggest thing for me is that the fact that Gus Malzahn still hasn't proven that he can win really big games away from Jordan-Hare Stadium. I mean, it just didn't happen all year this year. They struggled in both Tiger stadiums. They struggled in the bowl game. They struggled everywhere they went on the road. And so I think that's really what you start to fall back to.
How about Trey Duke saying, y'all have mentioned basketball too much? Some of y'all hate basketball.
Yeah.
Doesn't that amaze you? I mean, you played football, but you don't hate basketball.
No, I don't hate basketball.
Some of y'all hate basketball. It's fascinating.
I come in here, I'm jazzed up. Alabama's playing Auburn tomorrow night. It's a big game.
Is it a big game?
I'm going. Yeah, it's a big game. Big game. I'm going to the Bama basketball this weekend against Mississippi State. I'm excited about it. Some of you guys in the comment section, no time for it. It blows my mind. It's like, you know what? I don't even care. Right. I think it's funny.
Speaking of Alabama, this is a little juicy for me. Item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Our buddy Aaron Suttles over the Tuscaloosa News has been busy. Not only did he report the Hugh Freeze news off the top of the show, also reported about a potential rift, I guess that's the right word to use, between Daboll and Alabama coach Nick Saban. Let me show you what Suttles writes here. This is all in the same story, essentially. He says there was some frustration on Daboll's part on a personnel matter. Multiple sources told the Tuscaloosa News they weren't all that contentious, but they were frustrating for an offensive coordinator being asked to put his best offense on the field. Daboll wanted to play freshman quarterback Tua Tagovailoa sooner than he was given the green light to do so. That doesn't mean that Daboll didn't like or want to play Jalen Hurts too. That's not accurate at all. It's just that Daboll saw what Tagovailoa was doing in practice against the best defense in the country and wanted to give him a chance once the offense started slumping in November. Do you buy this, that Daboll wanted Tua earlier, Saban didn't want Tua maybe until he absolutely had to, and that may have influenced Daboll's decision to go back to the NFL?
Influence to go back to the NFL, I think that's a different conversation than the one and he said right there in the quote, it wasn't that contentious. It was just that there was a disagreement about playing time. And I definitely think it's something to point to. And listen, you and I had this conversation off the air. I went to the scrimmage back in August.
Yeah.
And Tua Tagovailoa was unbelievable. What he was doing to Alabama's starting defense. With that defensive line and those corners, he was torching them. So I understand what Brian Daboll was probably seeing at practice. I still think that Nick Saban, he probably waited a little too long, but I still think there was a good reason for him keeping Jalen Hurts on the field as long as he did. Brian Daboll steps into a situation where, he doesn't have any background with Jalen Hurts. That was Lane Kiffin last year. That was Steve Sarkisian last year. Brian Daboll just shows up and says, well, I think these players should play, not understanding in terms of what leadership has to be at some points from Jalen Hurts. So I don't think it was contentious enough that sent Brian Daboll to the NFL. Maybe it was kind of a hinging point. I think he wanted to go back to the NFL regardless.
Jeremy Pettis says Tua's fire. Saban put him in at the perfect time. Is it really the perfect time, though? I mean, yes, it clearly worked out to the tune of a national championship, but, man, it's a pretty risky decision to what I'm going to use, the same word I used a lot last offseason, micromanage your offensive coordinator to keep the better quarterback on the bench. You saw that with your own eyes. We certainly heard that from plenty of people. It was sort of obvious from some of the recruiting reporters that Tua was just a different kind of prospect. I mean, I made the case even before the start of the season that Tua was the better of the two guys, and yet Saban sort of steps in, and what I'm thinking of is sort of a micromanaging type way to keep Daboll from making the decision he wanted to make. Who's going to want to coach under those circumstances?
Yeah, probably nobody. And I also, and I mentioned this last week too, Daboll just had another kid. That's 6 kids. I didn't imagine somebody with 6 kids and a couple of newborns wanted to be on the recruiting trail all year working for Nick Saban and under his hour. So that to me was the biggest decision at what pointed. But I go back to the Jalen versus Tua decision all year, and I just, for the life of me, I can't really pick out one situation that it would have been a good idea to put Tua in. It's like, do you put him in when you're down by 2 touchdowns, on the road against Mississippi State? I'm not sure. Jalen led the comeback in that one. Do you want to throw Tua in on the road, against Auburn in the Iron Bowl and that crowd? I don't think so. So, as many questions as you can point to about Brian Daboll and Tua, I don't know when the decision could have been made before that.
Jake Stewart says he definitely waited too long to make the move on Tua. Here's the problem, though. You kind of said that, and I sort of agree that you almost waited too late. It ends up working out just fine. I mean, I told you before the start of the season, I didn't think they were going to win the championship with Jalen Hurts. Had Hurts finished the game, they weren't going to beat Georgia. At least I don't think. But as you mentioned, there was probably a good reason for why Saban didn't want to remove Hurts. I think it goes back to recruiting. I think how you handle the quarterbacks you have in your roster goes a long way in determining which future quarterbacks you get. The question is risking a future recruiting loss enough of a gamble when you had the season that you were currently in at stake?
Well, I think we can hinge recruiting versus national championship. To me, that's what Nick Saban had his eyes on. That's what the goal was on. That's what he owed to the players on the roster. I can't for the life of me, and everybody, can sit there and you can be an armchair quarterback and say, oh, well, they should have pulled Jalen here. They should have pulled Jalen here. What you're doing is putting a quarterback on the bench that has only lost 1 game in his career, and you're putting in a true freshman. And if Tua doesn't work out in some of those situations, Jalen's going to be right back in. So I don't know when the string was going to be pulled other than, the Clemson game and the national championship game.
Couple comments here. Logan Westerman says that I'm just using this as an I told you so moment without having to own it. That's not what I'm doing. I don't do a lot of I told you so stuff, do I? Even though I could over and over again. I'm kidding.
I don't see it that way at all.
I told you so.
Credit where credit's due. You know, BA has been talking about Tua Tagovailoa for the entire year, and he has mentioned the fact that Jalen Hurts, in his mind, didn't see him winning a national title. Now, Jalen got them on the doorstep of the national title, but obviously, you know, things didn't work out in the first half of that game, and you did have to insert Tua in the end.
Frank Crowder, by the way, says you may be bearing the lead here. Brian Daboll's got 6 kids.
Yeah.
Can you imagine 6 kids? I cannot imagine that.
He had
what must that be like?
The newborn right before training camp, maybe, or right after training camp or something like that. That was the first thing that popped up to me when this report came up from Ian Rappaport. We talked about it last week. Rappaport was a beat writer in Tuscaloosa. He was a beat writer in New England. He knows the insides and outs of the situation. When I thought, man, you got a newborn at home and you're working Nick Saban offensive coordinator hours, it's not a good, you know, it's not going to turn out good. I was not shocked that he headed back to the NFL.
All right, so if you weren't shocked by that, you may be shocked by this. Item number 7 here in SEC Country Live, our first and 10 list. So we talk sometimes about Bo Mattingly's radio show out there in Arkansas. He has a lot of good gas, and he's kind of got his finger to the pulse when it comes to what's going on in the state of Arkansas. Well, he had the analyst Danny Sheridan on the other day, and Sheridan is apparently very high on the future of Chad Morris there at Arkansas. Listen to how successful Sheridan, who's like a long-time number cruncher, gambling type guy, analyst type guy, listen to how high he is on Morris's future. This may surprise you. It surprised me.
It's not unreasonable to think in 3 or 4 years that Morris will be like number 2 in the SEC, maybe right behind Alabama and as good as Georgia. That's not unreasonable if his trend continues and he gets those Texas guys. 4 years from now, I say Morris is right up at the top with Alabama. Not
10
holding
wins?
his own with
10 wins. 4 years from now, Chad Morris has 10 wins?
Yeah, I'll go with 10. I was going to say 9.5 and give you an over-under, but I'll take 10 wins, yes. 4 years from now, 5 for sure.
Once again, that's Danny Sheridan, the analyst, the gambling number cruncher type guy on with Bo Mattingly in Arkansas, and I think that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Listen, I think that Arkansas as a program I feel pretty good about. Chad Morris as a coach, I'm still wait and see on. But it's the time frame, it's the parameter. Arkansas is not 3 or 4 years away from doing anything. It's just not. Arkansas right now has, I think, the weakest roster in the entire SEC. They're just not 3 or 4 years away. You're going to have to, you're going to have to stockpile talent to be in any kind of conversation like that. You've got to compile guys. Arkansas is a long way away from that. Morris may end up being a good coach. He certainly knows the state of Texas well, which is important for the Arkansas program. But he lost out on the top quarterback in-state, back in December. I just don't think we're 3 or 4 years away from anything.
Yeah. You mentioned Jerry Bohanna. Yeah, and that's, to me, listen, I find it tough to really tell you what any college football program is going to be in 3 or 4 years. You're talking about a completely different roster. You're talking about maybe even, a different coaching staff with the way coaches have worked nowadays. You don't even know that Chad Morris is going to be there in 4 or 5 years, honestly. I think I look at what Arkansas signing class is right now. They're dead last in the SEC in terms of recruiting. They're
rough.
81st in the country in terms of recruiting.
That's rough.
I don't know what Danny Sheridan is pointing to other than Chad Morris that says, you know what, these guys are going to be good in 4 years. He just obviously believes in Chad Morris that much. And that's fair. I think if you believe in a head coach that much, you believe in bringing John Chavis on board, you believe in, that kind of theory of play, then that's fair enough. I look at a team, and I look at, like you mentioned, probably the weakest roster in the SEC. I look at Chad Morris that hasn't been a coach on this level, John Chavis, who hasn't been himself in a few years, a team that has no speed. Arkansas, John Chavis and Chad Morris have both said they have to recruit speed, and they have to find it in the state of Texas. Right now, they don't have it. There's just nobody that's got game-breaking ability, in my opinion, on that team. And so, listen, Danny Sheridan, I get it. You believe in Chad Morris. You believe in Arkansas. I don't know what you're looking at that's sending you in that direction.
Let me hit a few comments because we're getting some good comments coming in here. Jay Steele says Arkansas is a doormat. I don't believe that's true. Arkansas has won the West at least 3 times, right?
Yeah.
At least 3 times. I know for a fact they've won it 3 times. That's not the recipe for a doormat. Chris Carlson, though, says the formula for rebuilding is doing more with less so you can get more to do more. You've covered this talking about Kirby Smart at Georgia. Here's the problem, though. You can't compare Kirby Smart's 2016 team with anything that Chad Morris is going to have in 2018. The roster that Kirby inherited before recruiting was already better than what Chad Morris had. And there's a strong relationship here between recruiting and defensive success. As Trey Duke says in the comment section, if you're running that Clemson-style offense, you can beat anybody. You can, and the numbers back this up, you can build a top-flight offense with 3-star recruits. You can. A lot of teams do it. A lot of the Big 12 teams have great success building high-powered offenses on 3-star recruits. But show me a really good defense that has 3-star recruits. They're just non-existent, especially in this part of the country. So you can sell me on Chad Morris developing a good offense with lesser talent, but if you don't find some defense and you can't find that without recruiting, then you're going to be, just the bottom of the SEC.
Well, listen, hey, you can talk about that Clemson offense too, but when did Clemson get good? It's when Taj Boyd got there.
Yeah.
It's when they found players offensively. Yeah, you can point to the system and say the system works and makes players good. Clemson was, what, a 6-win team in 2009 or 2010? I mean, they weren't that good. Daboll was on the doorstep of being fired, a couple of years after he got that head coaching job. So, the offense can plug in players and make players better than they are, but you still have to have decent players right now. And Arkansas, for me, they do have players in spots. I just think that there's so many holes across that football team. And John Chavis mentioned it in his opening presser, and that's tough for a new coach to do and say, listen, we've got holes everywhere that we have to fill, and we have to start recruiting at a higher level.
Drew Hazen's an Arkansas fan. He says with the young talent they have, Chavis and Morris will dominate. The players are hungry. Brett Bielema had to go. Agree with you in the last part. The players very well may be hungry. You certainly know that better than we do, being close to the Arkansas program there. I think Chavis was a pretty good hire. I just think there's a lot of talent that's got to be refilled there in Fayetteville to have any kind of conversation. It may take more than 3 or 4 years to get there. All right, let me move on to item number 8 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Quentin Dormady is leaving the University of Tennessee, the quarterback who he took the first snap, right? He started the season, right? And Garantano came off the bench. Dormady is now leaving the program. He put this message out on social media. Like a lot of these things, at the end, they kind of get long. But at the end, he says to my teammates and coaches, want to express my gratitude for all that you've done for me on and off the field. Wish the program the greatest success in the future. Go Vols, Quentin Dormady. Okay, so here is a moment in which I'm going to be totally biased and I'm going to be totally prejudiced. I'm just going to just put this out there right at the very get-go. If it's a different coach at Tennessee, I'm calling this bad news. But because it's Jeremy Pruitt, a guy that I sort of have some trust, a guy that I sort of think may be a pretty sharp guy, a guy that I think is going to manage a program pretty well, all of a sudden I don't view this as quite a bad news.
Yeah.
If it's Greg Schiano's the Tennessee coach and Quentin Dormady's leaving, I'm like, well, you know what? Tennessee's down a quarterback. That's probably a problem. I'm going to assume that Jeremy Pruitt's got a plan here. I'm going to assume that – I'm not telling you that Tennessee's good at quarterback, but I'm saying that Dormady leaving is not some sort of deal breaker for the program. And I'm putting a lot – I'm just leading with my chin here on this one. I'm putting a lot of my faith in this on the fact that for now anyway, I'm going to trust Jeremy Pruitt.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that they're probably – Quentin Dormady probably stepped in Jeremy Pruitt's office, probably got a lot of truth put in his direction, and probably thought, you know what? It's the best decision for me to get out of here. And I have to be honest with you. I feel kind of bad for Quentin Dormady. I feel like in no way was he put in a position to succeed last year. I feel like the offense, how many times have we mentioned it? Predictable. There was just so many opportunities that Quentin Dormady did not get. It was like, Dormady might be a really talented gunslinger style of quarterback. Yeah. Didn't have that leadership, outspoken reputation, so he ends up getting benched. And at no point was Tennessee even good last year. He didn't have a surrounding cast or a wide receiver core that you thought could be a unit that you could thrive under. So I think this is best for both sides. I look at Quentin Dormady and say, you know what? Continue your career somewhere else where you might have better playmakers around you and maybe a little bit less of stifling defenses across from you, and see if you can work yourself into being a good player.
And my knee-jerk reaction, and listen, I'm sitting here in Atlanta, Georgia. That's a couple hundred miles away from Knoxville, so maybe my knee-jerk is wrong here. My knee-jerk reaction was that Garantano was the better of the two prospects. Yeah. He was just a better prospect. And Butch Jones, I know how Tennessee fans feel about their buddy Lyle, but Butch Jones was miserable when it comes to maximizing the offensive talent. You can see Alvin Kamara at the NFL level and see an example of that. Maybe whatever went down with Jared Garantano was an example of that. He seemed to like Dormady better, but Garantano was sort of the better overall prospect.
By the way, go look at the list of quarterbacks that have transferred, out from under Tennessee and have gone on to be good players. Nathan Peterman, Riley Ferguson. You've seen these quarterbacks show up at other places and turn out to be really good players that were not very good under Butch Jones. And so that's what kind of leads me to believe. I'm excited for Quentin Dormady. I'm with you. I believe that Jeremy Pruitt just said, hey, listen, this is probably not the direction you want to go. I would probably go somewhere else if I were you. And he probably told him straight up that, listen, Jared Garantano right now, a little bit more mobile, a little bit more vocal. That's probably the guy we're going to instill in our offense.
All right, let me do item number 9 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So we've been talking a lot about hype videos announcing guys going to the NFL. Now we're getting hype videos for guys choosing to stay for their final year at college, including John Battle here from LSU, who I swear, I think he played with Dwayne Bowe. How long has John Battle been at LSU? Seemingly 1,000 years.
Recruited by Nick Saban.
I think maybe he was one of Saban's recruits. Well, anyway, Battle's coming back to LSU here and announced that via what I thought was a pretty cool hype video. Take a look at Battle and his announcement to come back to LSU. So in just a minute here, you're going to see a little bit of a Batman tie-in, obviously, with the Battle nickname. But we'll talk over this a little bit while the video plays. First of all, I mean, I think all of this is about compiling talent. I think all this is about having capable guys in your roster. Orgeron needs as many as he can get. They moved Jacoby Stevens back and forth last year. I have no idea what's going on with that. The LSU fans can tell me if they thought that Grant Delpit lived up to the freshman year or not. But getting Battle back is probably a good thing, right? There's the Batman thing, by the way.
It's got to be a good thing. When you look at the fact that Dante Jackson's out now at corner, Kevin Tolliver's out now at corner, you did have a couple of freshman safety that you felt good about going into the year last year, but Jacoby Stevens, as you mentioned, flips a wide receiver, flips back, doesn't really find a home. I'm not sure what's going on with the secondary either, but I got to believe that Dave Aranda being the defensive coordinator and having John Battle back at the back end along with Devin White at the second level, that's something you can build off of. I don't think that that's what the offense has right now. I think that you look at the offense and say, what are we leaning on right now? What is our identity? What is Steve Ensminger going to be? Who's going to replace Toby Weathersby and Will Clapp up front? Who's the go-to guy under Darius? Other than Darius Geis, since he's going to the NFL. Right now on defense, though, I feel like you have a little bit of something to build on, and I think that's more than the offensive side can say at LSU.
Cliff Nelson says defensive back University. Esteban Estevez says he's coming back for his doctoral degree. Maybe that's it. Maybe he's just this close to a PhD and he wants to get that thing finished off.
And that guy's going to be a professor by the time he gets out of there. I mean, he's been there a while.
Is he the one? And our LSU fans will tell me this. Our LSU fan listeners and viewers will tell us this. There's somebody in that secondary, I believe it is John Battle, they call Pawpaw already.
Probably so. Well, he reclassified.
Which is hilarious. That's a pretty funny nickname.
Well, he went through the whole offseason was a senior. And then right before the season started, reclassifies as a junior and obviously gets the extra year. So it's got to be him that's called Pawpaw.
James Michael Garanga says that he's been at LSU longer than JT Barrett's at Ohio State. Yeah, that's probably about right on that. So I think good news for LSU. I don't know if he's a game-changing player, but you want as many good players as you can get. Here's something kind of weird, though, for item number 10 here on SEC Country Live. I think this is a little dirty on Barry Odom, the Missouri coach's part. And admittedly, we probably don't talk a ton about Missouri here, but they did lose Josh Heupel. Heupel, the offensive coordinator there, who had great success, leaves and goes. What are you laughing at?
Robert Patrick says Battle may be too old to be eligible for the NFL draft. Anyways, like that. And Shannon Burgess says he's only missing his thesis paper to get his doctorate. That guy,
he's been there for a while.
I hate to stick on that. And obviously, we'll move on to topic number 10. But the guy's been there forever.
No, he's been there. I feel
like he was there when I left college.
Y'all don't get Mike cracked up too much when you do. I always think that's funny. But anyway, the point here is Odom's announcing Derek Dooley, who nobody knows what kind of offense this guy's going to run, if he's going to be successful at all. But in the midst of doing that, he takes what looks to me to be a bit of a shot at Josh Heupel here, who's now the head coach at UCF. This is Dave Matter, who's covered Missouri for a million years, says Odom says he wants a coach who's on the same page with the rest of the staff and, quote, doesn't have agendas. Sounds like he's saying that Josh Heupel had a bit of his own agenda. Is it because he wanted to be a head coach? Is it because he thought maybe you weren't running the Missouri program very well? Before Heupel came along, there was evidence to suggest that Odom wasn't running the Missouri program very well. Let me show you another kind of weird tweet here that was captured in this press conference as well. Dooley says the offense is going to be more oriented for what Drew Lock's going to see in the NFL, but adds that Lock's going to have a heavier mental load than the Heupel's offense. What are you calling Josh Heupel dumb now? I mean, am I reading too much into this? It seems like he's taking some shots there, right?
I think that what Barry Odom said is very true. By the way, Barry Odom said, the fast-paced offense is good unless all of a sudden you're off the field in 3 plays and you can't convert on third downs and your defense is back out there. They were very good. They were very good on third downs this year. Sometimes I think that gets lost in Barry Odom's mind that, listen, you had a great offense this year, and it is the reason you still have a job. That's what I would tell Barry Odom. It's the reason you still have a job is Josh Heupel. Now, did Josh Heupel have some kind of hidden agenda? If I was Josh Heupel and I was at Missouri after we started, 0-5 and 0-6,
Yeah.
I would start to develop my own agenda too. I'd say, you know what, this is a sinking ship, by God. I need to find a job.
He's clearly upwardly mobile. He was a hot shot coach at Utah State. He did Missouri a favor by even coming there. It was obvious he wasn't going to stay very long. He is so much I can't believe I'm worked up on this subject because it couldn't matter less. But he is so much a superior coaching candidate, coaching prospect to boring, average as grits Barry Odom, who if Barry Odom walked the halls of every SEC college in the country, there's not a single fan base out there who would even know who he is.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that Odom's going to turn his nose up at Josh Heupel, who saved his job and did him a favor by even coming here.
It's never too early for hot takes, right? What happens next year when Odom gets fired and Josh Heupel gets that call? All of a sudden, Missouri jumps back on that bandwagon with Josh Heupel, and maybe he did have a hidden agenda where, you know what, I do want to be a head coach. This is not the guy that's going to lead me to a national title.
Honestly, I'm not so sure that UCF's not a better job than Missouri right now. I'm sorry, I'm just not
so messed up, but it's kind of scary that it might actually be true.
All right, listen, we always close the show the same way each and every day here on SEC Country Live. We call it our champion of life. Today, I think we have a pretty good one, and I'm going to tell you why I think this is funny. Peyton Manning, obviously the great former Denver Broncos quarterback, Indianapolis Colts as well, but this is in Denver. He's at a Nuggets game, and he's honored on by the public address announcer. He shows up on the video board. Manning has kind of the too cool for school pro athlete thing down perfectly here. His son, however, does not. Manning's son thinks being on the video board is a lot bigger deal than Peyton Manning does. I found this to be hilarious. Take a look at this.
FM is in the house. Please welcome number 18, the Sheriff, Rocket Arm, Omaha, hurry, Peyton Manning, yeah!
First of all, it's sort of hard to decide here who's more overzealous. The son or the PA announcer?
Yeah.
The PA announcer won't stop introducing with the Omaha. That's embarrassing, Peyton. I mean, you can see the look on Manning's face.
Yeah, he's like,
embarrassed by all of this.
Sure, okay, get the camera.
And his son's obviously kind of showing out here. And I love it because, as I said, pro athletes, I don't know if you were like this when you played or not, but pro athletes have this great way of sort of acting like nothing's that big of a deal. You know, people cheering and waving. Pro athletes just kind of give you the little, you know, the finger point, the nod. They're just everything's very cool for pro athletes. Manning's that's very pro athlete-esque right there from a former professional athlete. It's only fitting. Manning's obviously playing it very, very cool right there. And the fact that his son can't play it as cool as he does, I do think it's actually kind of embarrassing him a little bit.
No, I think what's so important about what you just said about that is I think that if Peyton could take off the Peyton persona, that's what he'd act like. It would be his kid. He would be bouncing around. He'd be making jokes. He'd be making a scene at the basketball game. That's what Peyton would be. That's what Peyton was like as a kid, I imagine.
Yeah, and what people don't realize is that a lot of times you get the free tickets for the basketball game, and as an exchange for that, they got to put you on the video board.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah, like you don't get those free tickets for free. You got to be on the video board. Now there's a line of people wanting to shake Peyton Manning's hand, and his son only makes it worse. That's part of what this is.
No, I love it. Well, you know, the son can help him escape from the situation. I got to get him out of here.
That's very true. All right, so listen, we got a podcast. It's on iTunes. We'd love to have you subscribe to it if you want to hear the audio version of the show. If you missed a portion today, podcast, a great way to get caught up on that. Also, we'd love to have you share this show with your friends on Facebook. Let them know. We're talking about the SEC each and every afternoon. It's the off season, but we're still raring to go here, having a great time every day, but it wouldn't be fun without you. So we'll look forward to seeing you again at 3 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow for another episode of SEC Country Live.